Thank you. Thank you for joining us. This is our second session of Hard Talk Made Easy. My name is Brian Siegel, and I am what you call a somatic relationship coach. And what that means is it's about how we work our relationships better by using the feedback that we feel within our body, the senses and feelings that we sense within our body. So maybe just observe what happens to your breathing, or what happens to you when I talk to you like this, and what happens when I move a bit closer. Can you maybe feel how your body becomes a bit more less comfortable? And what you might notice is you might notice that your thinking becomes a bit more. That is because you're feeling less safe. And in that, we go more into what I call our strategic thinking, our logical processor of how do we maneuver, or how do we get out of this more dangerous situation? And so within relationships, it's really, really important that we are able to go into a far more softer space, a place where we can have those difficult conversations from a place of softness. Tonight's title is going to be Obedience is Not Attractive. If I look at society today, there's so many women, predominantly women, that are obedient within their relationships, obedient to the man, to maybe just chat of what happens when someone is obedient. Because for me, there are three roles that we really have within relationships. The first one is the role of the protector. The second one is the role of the compliant, the good boy or good girl. And the third one is the maneuverer. And I'll explain each of these roles in a bit more detail. But for me, what is important is that the obedient role is the compliant one, the good boy or the good girl. And what happens is the moment I go into that role, see what happens to your energy. See how maybe your mood wants to change. Mark, with your videos on, I'm just going to say, are you enjoying this? And maybe if you want to engage with me, that would be beautiful. So
I'm intrigued by the title, and I'm waiting to see what you're about to say.
Well, it's really nice to have you on the show. You see, obedience has also got a bit of a surrender, and so it's really nice to have you on the show. Can you feel? Just share with me what happens when I talk from a more place of obedience.
You look more like you're cowering away rather than obedient. Sorry to be blunt.
That's fine. So what would obedience look like for you? Sorry to put you on the spot.
To be honest, I have no idea.
Okay.
I couldn't describe it in a mannerism, but the mannerism you had, you were sort of like ducking down and pulling far away, kind of thing. That looked.
So for me, obedience and surrender have got similarities, because when I'm obedient to you, I do have a fear of you. I do have there's a bit of a cowering away of that whatever you say is correct, or just tell me what I need to do, because just tell me what I need to do. So there is that loss of energy, and that when I begin to collapse, what automatically happens is I encourage the other one to go more into their power. It's part of the power struggle, part of the dynamic of the relationship that in our dance that we've got. One of two things has to happen is that when I collapse, the other person has to meet me in the collapsing, and that is uncomfortable, or they become more dominant. And then this is where the cycle really comes in, is that they become more dominant, and the more dominant they become, the more collapsing I become, the more scared I become of them, the more obedient I become of them. And so what happens is that cycle then begins to increase. And that's where so many people say that they've got narcissistic relationships. And I've got a curiosity of how much of those narcissistic relationships are created by my sense of obedience, of less than. And how does that necessarily feed into that relationship that we're having? The danger in it. And all I can say is, for me as a man, in a relationship, when I'm meeting somebody that's obedient, it makes me feel uncomfortable. It makes me feel really insecure, because what I know as part of the surrender, part of the collapse, is I can only hold that position for a certain time. And then it's going to come out somewhere else. So I'm going to be like this. I'm going to say, oh, that's really nice, and collapse in it. And then afterwards, it's going to come out either in anger of how dare you, how dare you control me that way, or how dare you. So it comes out as anger, or it comes out as the other role of being a maneuverer. So it might be something like, well, you don't take the rubbish out. Okay, the conversation's got nothing to do with the rubbish. The conversation has got to do with that we've lost connection. We've lost our connection. We've lost our sense of intimacy. And so in that, that dynamic then comes back on. So whenever I find myself meeting somebody in obedience, it really makes me scared, because my sense of trust gets so much less with them, of that I'm not trusting the honesty. I'm not trusting that if I ask them something, that they can really stand up for me. Whereas when they are able to stand up to me, it gives me a far greater sense of security within my relationship. We're talking about obedience and really what it brings up with us.
Well, I'll have a stab at it. Let's say. I was a bit nervous when you started speaking. Must be honest that I got the feeling that, or I was starting to get a little bit scared that you were going to say that this obedience domination thing was the way to go, and that is not something that works for me. So I'm very glad that you cleared that all up, and that it's not a sustainable or useful way to manage a relationship. In terms of obedience, I think if we put it maybe in terms of, I think avoidance is probably the closest word for my particular experience.
Yeah.
In my longest relationship, that there were certain things that would trigger a form of behavior, whether it be sulking or stomping feet, or an argument, or shouting, or being ignored, and all those kinds of things. So eventually I got to the point where, when those things started happening, I just let it go. I didn't deal with it. I didn't want to try and deal with it, because all previous experience had been negative, that it doesn't work out, it doesn't help.
So what you're really saying is that from your experience, you avoiding it also didn't help, but you didn't know how to deal with it, and you didn't know how to avoid it. So you tried to avoid it, but in the avoidance, did the avoidance help the situation?
It helped in the way, or in the sense that it didn't, the unpleasant situations didn't build up or didn't happen. But what it did do was it allowed those behaviors to become the norm and to happen more often, more frequently, until they were just, I guess, accepted as part of it.
So what I'm wanting to do is I'm wanting to take it into somatic. I'm wanting to take it into what I call the somatic language of what happens, because for me, what happens is I first sense things in my body. And then from that, I begin to have a place of reaction or reactivity that actually happens. And one of the things I talk about is connection and disconnection. So when we are connected, we generate a sense of flow. And it's a feeling, it's a warmth that happens. And so what happens is the moment there's disconnection, if we don't restore the connection, then we're scared to connect. And so the disconnection grows. And in my somatic language, that is what you're describing, is how from the sulkiness, the disconnection happened. and then more disconnection happened, and then more disconnection happened, and then the disconnection became the norm. Is that more or less accurate? Okay.
Yeah, the behavior, me accepting the behavior became the norm, but it did create a sense of disconnectedness.
Okay. All right. Great. Thank you. So from my experience, so much of our conversations, or so much of our actions happen, I'm going to call it from our logical center here. And so even in my obedience, it's a logical strategy that I have to feel safe. It comes from our reptilian brain, it comes from our reptilian senses that when we're out in the felt, if there was somebody that over-dominated us, we would collapse and would find our safety in collapsing because we couldn't fight them. Whereas somebody came that we could overpower, we would become the protector and would fight them and chase them away. Or the third one, the maneuvering, is that we'd create space, that if we saw the enemy coming far away, we would be able to maneuver and run away from it. So with those three roles in mind, our brain does exactly the same thing, that when we get scared, we feel a contraction in our body, or we feel this disconnection. And if we're able to speak about what is happening in our body, for me, that's the most effective way of bringing connection because there's a truth in it. Your body and my body are feeling that same disconnection. And so what we do is we go into the brain and we try to find a logical solution for it. Whereas for me, it's how do I find a somatic solution for it? So something like, wow, I just enjoyed your smile. So as I saw you smile, it made my body relax and it made me kind of say, oh, gee, that's wonderful. It's lovely to have a smile. And so by sharing that simple somatic gesture that I'm picking up brings connection. What do I feel like to you when I say I enjoyed your smile?
It just made me laugh.
Okay. And what happened to connection?
I guess there wasn't a disconnect, but it kind of reinforced the chatting connection that we have.
Yeah. But if you can feel, for me, it brings a connection a bit more powerful, a bit more close. And so the same thing happens that I don't know. I mean, we are role playing, but I don't know if you want to say something nasty to me. I don't know if you want to create a disconnection.
It's no.
So I'm just pretending I'm sulking now. I just can't satisfy you. There's this feeling that I just can't satisfy you, Mark. Whatever I try and do is not good enough, and so I just don't know how I'm going to satisfy you.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's the distance. The distance moves apart, or the distance increases.
Okay. And just you feel the tone of your voice. What's happening to the tone of your voice? Can you feel how your tone of voice has become a bit more sharper? Okay. And your smile, where's that? And even that smile is not as warm as the previous smile. And so all of that makes me kind of be a bit more uncomfortable with you and go back. Okay. So this is how the disconnect grows. But what is happening? Close your eyes and sense what's happening in your body. And just give me a sensation of what's happening in your body and feed that to me. If you can.
I don't know if it's a historical thing, because that's exactly the kind of let's call it behavior that I used to just pretend didn't happen and let it go. But there's kind of a it's not butterflies in my stomach, but I'm feeling a little bit tense.
Okay, so then just say, I'm feeling tense. I feel butterflies in my stomach. Just say that to me.
Well, I am feeling tense.
Okay. Yes, I'm also. You see, what happens is the moment you talk about that feeling in your body, I'm feeling a bit tense. All of a sudden, there's a bit of truth because I'm also feeling the tension, and because of the tension, that's why I'm going this way to avoid the tension. Know how to deal with this tension between you and I, and so that's part of my sulkiness is that I don't know whether who's feeding who, but we're both feeding each other. Okay, and when you bring in that truth of, gee, I'm feeling this tension, are you? All of a sudden I say, yes, I am. And now that gives an opportunity to say, let's talk about it. And then the beauty of using our somatic intelligence is, as you start talking about it, if you say something that I can't hear, your body will feel the disconnection. And then you can always retract and saying, gee, sorry, I shouldn't have said that. Or, gee, maybe I was misunderstood. Because what happens is we normally go into our head when we misunderstood. And so it's about how we feel that over there. And you feel how the tension's gone a little bit?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And then I can feel my body relaxing. Can you feel your body relaxing a bit? And so you see, I'm using somatic language of you sensing my body. I can notice that there comes a deep breath of relaxation. And so I can now feel the connection growing again. What's very beautiful is I can sense this, that it's in that connection world that we establish the flow. And it's once the flow is there that we can then begin to find out what was my sulking about. But without that flow, it just generates the disconnection more. Thank you. Thank you for your courage of asking, of being a participant. A lot of time, what we do is we're scared to become more intimate. And that also keeps us locked in that cycle. All right. And it's something that we like to defend. So, I mean, it is a very difficult conversation because this is the first time you and I have met. And so to be more intimate is guarded and is unsafe. And of course, so I'm not saying it with any kind of criticism, but I'm just saying it with an observation of what happens is sometimes when we begin to restore flow, we get scared of that. And then we try to break the flow by talking about more light conversations. How are you feeling? Can I ask you that?
Feeling fine.
Fine. Okay. All right.
Mood-wise, bloody hot here in Joburg.
Yeah. It's been hot here in Cape Town as well, but today the wind was here. Yeah. So the weather would have been a good example of that. Rather than being able to take it deeper of, well, if this was a personal relationship, well, how are you feeling? I'm feeling relieved that that my tension's lessening, and then that allows it to take it deeper and deeper.
What you're saying is something that I've experienced in the last few years. In a nutshell, my marriage started coming to an end 6-7 years ago, and my natural kind of response was like jump in and fix, and that didn't help. It actually just seemed to make things worse, but it had a very negative impact on me mentally. I had never lived with depression, and it hit me in a very big way. I did a number of things to help myself. One was joining support groups for people with depression. The other was to join a divorce support group. And the third was to see a psychologist. And the psychologist helped me to not internalize everything, not just hold it in and go, so how are you feeling? Fine. That I hadn't been a great expresser of emotions and those kinds of things. And she helped me to, she forced me initially, but it became the norm, it became comfortable, it became acceptable for me to do, was to be able to speak and share. So it's over enough time with that skill, and then the, call it the support and surviving skills from the support groups, that is what I've learned, or what has got me through what I call my dark days.
Thank you. And that is very sad, because I think as society, we're too scared to feel. We haven't been taught to feel. We've taught that feelings are bad. It's something we avoid.
Especially if you're male.
So because, yes, I'm going to agree with you, especially if you're male. But what I'm saying is also, especially if you're female as well, because what happens is I'm talking about connected feelings and disconnected feelings. So what happens is, as a male, when I disconnect, I become more practical and more factual and more argumentative. Okay. So you'll agree with me, you'll agree on the facts of that, won't you? Okay. And so I will go into that factual part to as my relief of my inner core emotions. But sadly, what society doesn't really acknowledge or recognize is that there's another way, and I'm going to reluctantly say women, but we often swap roles, and it's not always that. But we go into our disconnected feelings. And so my disconnected feelings is that if I was feeling insecure about this conversation, I might go into this disconnected feelings of saying, Mark, how do you feel about this conversation? Are you enjoying it? I just want to know, are you enjoying it, and why can't you share your feelings?
I am enjoying it, and I am sharing.
Okay, so
but I know where you go.
So there you come from your place of centeredness, and that takes me back. But I know that within my marriage, when I got that, it was, gee, I'm damned if I do, I'm damned if I don't, and how do I answer it?
I was going to say that, yeah, that the old me would have sort of backed off and stayed away, specifically in that environment. In the workplace, not so much. I would have stood up for something that I believed in, but at home, I became this avoid conflict, avoid hassle, avoid everything. So it's, yeah.
Thank you. I'm loving your honesty. I'm also loving that a work relationship is different to a personal relationship. With a work relationship, by nature, is strategic. And so you can argue your way out. Whereas a relationship is more feelings. And so what we've done is we've been fooled to think that women feel and men don't. In that women disconnect from their feelings and they talk from their disconnected feelings. And in that, they contract us from our feelings, but both of us are disconnected from our feelings. What I'm amazed at is I've been having a few conversations with people about obedience and with women about obedience, and what I've really understood, Mariette, do you want to maybe join in and share your feelings of obedience around that?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Okay, so I've noticed in my life, I was mostly the good girl, always obedient. And I could never understand, because I found a lot of in a lot of relationships, and it didn't matter who it was, I felt taken advantage of or abused in certain ways. And I always just thought that it was the other person. There's something wrong with them. But I never understood that it's the dance, as you call it. And it was my own behavior because um, I didn't stand my ground. I didn't believe in myself. I didn't.
So what you're saying is you didn't know how to express your feelings.
Yes.
That you might have felt scared.
Yes.
And so in that you said, yes, certainly I'll make you a cup of tea or
Yes.
whatever that obedience was.
Yes.
As
And the
opposed to
more.
saying, no, I don't want to do it because
Yeah.
you were too scared to stand it. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, and the more I did, the more things I did, and whatever I did or gave to people, the more disconnected the relationship became, and the more taken advantage of I felt.
Okay.
So, and some relationships even just broke down completely.
Sure. I feel it's sadness in that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you see, so that's what happened is that relationship grew, and the more you became obedient, the more it gave them permission to power
Yes.
over you, and the
Yes.
more that dysfunctionality came.
Yes.
Whereas the more you'd be able to stand not in your obedience, but to stand in your power of, I won't do that. I don't feel like doing that. But not in your logical, aggressive power, because there's two different powers that I've got. The one is the power over. And Mark, you were talking a bit about the power over of being that logical driver, and within your relationship, you spoke from a place of logic, and that's a power overing that it brings into it. Whereas I'm talking of power within. And so when I speak from my more centered power within, it creates a very different feeling. So a good example would be, Mark, of what you said earlier on when I tried to corner you. And you went, no. But there was the power, I got the power within. And so all of a sudden, there was like a center of gravity that was grounding, as opposed to one that is overpowering. Beautiful. Thank you. I just wanted to thank Mark and Mariette for your bravery and speaking. It's greatly appreciated.
Good evening. I've been here just listening. I wanted to add on to what Mariette said about feeling like the good girl. And I feel like I can really relate because I went through a point in my life where I was just trying to please everyone and do what they wanted, and I was never happy. And over time, working with Brian, having conversations, learning breathing techniques, calming techniques, grounding techniques, I have been able to take a step back and look at things and be like, do I really want this? Or do I want it because my friend, for example, said, oh, this is what you should do. This is how we should live. This is what we want. And it was very draining on me because I always wanted to be someone that they wanted me to be, never realizing that I wasn't happy. And being on this journey, like for the last year, finding myself, I have learned that you can't always be the good girl and you can't always please everyone else if it makes you unhappy. And yeah, I just thought that I would share that with you guys. Thank you for the conversation. Very enlightening and very relatable also. Yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you, Nikita.
Brian, I want to say something else, please. So remember the conversation we had this morning? What happens to trust when somebody is in their good girl or good boy mode? What happens to the other parties?
Okay, thanks. So,
Thank you.
So yes, what happens is I struggle to trust somebody when they go into that obedient or good boy or good girl mode, because what happens is I realize that there's going to be a retaliation some other time. That it's like a pressure cooker where you can only contain that state for a certain time. So I can only be good or placid for a certain time. And then it's going to come out one of a few ways. The one way is either going to come out as anger, but it's a volcanic anger. Because it's pent up, and now all of a sudden, you'll not treat me like that. Do you understand me? And so it will become very much of an overpowering anger of that, and then the roles switch. That's the one way. Or the other way will be, yes, no, I agree with you, but then it becomes manipulative. So maybe our lovemaking, you won't want to make love with me, but that's how you'll get revenge. Okay, you'll feel, and so you'll use other ways of getting revenge, or otherwise you might somehow bring my family members in on part of your team to support you in other ways. And so you'll badmouth me, or you'll get rid of that discomfort through bringing in family members or bringing in other things. So what happens is that relationship becomes disconnected and toxic, and so it really, I struggle to actually trust it. But that's my wiring. But the other wiring of that is that I could love that, and I could take advantage of it. And I could then become more and more dominant and force you more into that submissive role of, I've got you where I want you, girl. You will listen to me. You will be obedient to me. You will follow my commandments. You will listen to me, and I've got you where you are. And this is what I want for supper, and this, wash the dishes, etc., etc. And in that role, the disconnection grows. And then eventually that turns into maybe domestic violence. Because now what happens is when you refuse to do that, I'm so overpowered that all of a sudden, in my anger, and I'll say, you will do it, and react to that. And so it's both people that grow that polarity, because what happens is the violence grows as an escalation of that disconnection. What I wanted to also say is that as a man, for years I was scared of my anger, because that was how I expressed my anger. I would suppress it, and that's why I know this so well, that I'd suppress it, and it wouldn't come out violently, but it would come out verbally or aggressively. So the aggressiveness would be in verbal aggression, not in physical violence. And so I know that role really, really well, and the toxicity of it, and how it didn't serve me. And so for years I was really scared of anger. But what I'm learning now is that healthy anger is that when I feel that no, that what I do is I express it. That is my anger. Of no, I won't do that. No, I don't feel like doing that. But it's that no that breaks that breaks a cycle, because in that no, in that inner firmness of that no, is where the cycles are broken. And that's where connection is created again, is in that no. Because the beauty about the power of no is that if I know that you can say no, I can trust your yes. Because part of the cycle of obedience is that I can't trust the person's no. Will you do this for me? Yes, of course, Brian. Will you do this for me? Of course, Brian. Will you do this? Of course, Brian. And so it just gets bigger and bigger. Of course, of course, of course. But what's happening is I'm putting more and more weight on the other person's shoulders. Whereas if I say, will you do this? And they say no. Yes, I might get that shock. I might say, what? But then all of a sudden, if I ask you to do something, if you say yes, I can trust it that much more, because now it's a yes, I want to do it, as opposed to yes, I've got no option. Yes, no, I'll do anything for peace. I'll in my obedience, I'll do it, of course. And so that is really why, really wanting to encourage people to express their healthy anger, their healthy no, they're healthy and uncomfortable. I'm uncomfortable. It doesn't fit with me. That's such an important part of growing connection within relationships. So thank you for that. Thank you for reminding me about that conversation.
Thank you. I have another something that I wanted to say. So I was thinking, of this conversation, and it made me think about, say, for example, you ask me to do something, but because I'm a yes girl and I always say yes, then maybe somebody else comes along and asks me to do something else, and then so you can't trust me because I don't have your best interests at heart, so to say, because I'm a people pleaser. Does that also come into play? I don't know.
Of course, as a good girl or good boy, you are a people's pleaser. You'll do anything for peace. And so it's learning to have it, but it's also maybe learning to sense, and this is the beauty of sensing what your body says. Because for me, what I notice that my no. What happens is very often, if somebody asks me to do something, I'll notice my contraction, I'll notice my body going back or tightening. And I'll say, oh, but the potential clients have to say yes. Or, oh, but I don't know how to say no. But it's by listening to that body, it's by listening to that intuitive first knee-jerk reaction that happens in your body. That is where your yes and no is. And so what happens is if you feel this, and if I don't know how to answer you, I might say, gee, Mark, let me think about it. Can I come back tomorrow? It's better than me going, no, that's fine, Mark. I don't mind at all. That's really beautiful. Let's do that. Okay. It's about giving yourself space to reflect, or it's about giving yourself space, or it might even be if you're scared to say no, because very often we are, for the connection, to create connection again, of, gee, I'm feeling really scared. I'm feeling really scared. What would your reaction to that be?
Yeah, I'd say, okay, let's talk about it. Or
okay. So now you're inviting me in. So, okay, you want to talk about it? And that is because I'm scared that I say, no, I'm going to hurt you.
Yeah.
But what I've done is by coming back to that body of saying I'm feeling scared, I open the flow.
Yeah.
I'm feeling scared. I open the flow, and then I allow you to ask the question of why. Or do you want to talk about it? And I can say, well, I'm really scared I'm going to hurt you.
Okay. And then another thing, if I may. So what happens is if you always the good girl or the good boy, then eventually you start losing respect for yourself because you're not standing in your power, you're not strong in yourself, and you're just allowing things to go whichever way.
Very much so, because we're disempowered. So the moment we're disempowered in any of those roles, we really begin to lose respect for ourselves. Because then we fall in love with that role more and more, and Nikita, you're saying that's true in your comments. Thank you. Because what's happening is in that role of disconnection is where I lose my power. So that's absolutely true. Thank you for that observation. Beautiful.
And then the next thing, you start blaming everybody else, and then everybody else is a so and so because you're the good girl or the good boy.
Okay. Yeah. So see what
and
would
the
happen
next
is
relationship is the same thing.
So then more than likely what happens is you swap roles from the good girl to the manipulator. The manipulator is about manipulating, creating space. And so, Mariette, this conversation is all your fault. You know, the fight is all your fault. Okay. So what's happened is I've sucked it up as a good girl and I go into that, but that's not my default. So I'm not very skilled at it. So the other person would more than likely be able to beat you back into being the good girl quite quickly into that. Yeah. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay. So what I wanted to sum up was I just wanted to sum up what I call the role triangle, and that is the protector. And the protector is one that uses logical disconnect to protect. Let me talk about the facts. Well, let me talk about religion. Because in that, you can't get to the person because it's a disconnected thing. COVID was such a good example. If you were pro-vaccine, you had all the facts to prove why the vaccine was the solution. And if you're anti-vaccine, you had all the facts to prove why not to believe it. And so both of them were in that disconnect of arguing different facts. And the argument went nowhere because it wasn't going to the emotions of it, but it was arguing facts against facts. Okay. And then eventually what would happen is the one would collapse and might have become the maneuverer. Okay. Oh, well, you know nothing about, nothing about science, do you? Not very factual. But in that is that collapse, that's that thing of saying, so what do you know about facts? And, that scientist that you're using has been disregarded and disreputed. Well, that's bringing in that disconnected emotion. And so then it would go like that for a little while. Or otherwise, what would happen is you then go into that third role of being the good boy, of yes, now go and get my vaccine. Never go and get it, but just to end the conversation. And so it's really those three roles that really bring in our disconnection. And that the more we disconnect from it, the more we amplify it. And the more we connect to our souls, the more we ground our souls and allow us to have a far more constructive relationship. So within that, I'd like to thank you for your time and the conversation.
One more question, please, Brian. Sorry.
Certainly.
Just explain to me the roles. So if you so if I'm the good girl, is the only option for you then to be the protector? And if you're the protector, how does it work, or is it any which way?
Effectively, it's any which way. From my experience, it has to do with how you survived your childhood. So it's that default pattern that you learned, behavioral pattern that you learned in your family. So, for example, within me, I learned how to be the good boy because that's how I won my mother's favor. And then what would happen is that's by default what I chose in my relationship patterns was to continue being the good boy. And there would be certain people that would have learned protection, the protector as a default mechanism or the maneuver. So we really inherited from our childhood. But we do swap all three. So if I'm a good girl, if I'm a good boy and you're a good girl, one of us, we're fighting for that. And so the moment we both can't be in that, and so the moment it becomes too uncomfortable, one of us will go into the protector or the maneuverer. Okay, or if we're both in the maneuver, the same thing will happen. And it also depends on who within, because my default was a good boy. But with my sister, I was a protector. I bullied her. I could. She was weaker than me. I was the man and she was the woman, whatever that role was. And so I could protect her, but to my mother. So I got my anger out on my sister a little bit. And so we do swap roles as well, but we do have a default strategic strategy of what we want to do.
Thank you for that.
Okay, pleasure. Thank you, Mark. Thanks, Mariette. Thanks, Nikita. And thanks, Suzette. Hope you've enjoyed it. And we look forward to seeing you this time next week. Many thanks. Thank you for your participation. Appreciate it. Goodbye.
Yeah.